Now, globally speaking, the Toyota RAV4 is actually one of the most successful SUVs out there. It's got a strong reputation for being durable, rugged, practical, and just a great family vehicle to have. Now, as we race towards electrification, Toyota have introduced one of the most important variants of this car to serve as a stepping stone before we go all electric in the very, very near future. This is the new RAV4 plug-in hybrid. Now, this latest RAV4 is anything other than a shrinking violet. It really is a bold looking thing. Gone are the days of Japanese design being quite subtle and maybe blending into the background a bit too much. This is making a style statement. It's boxy, it's bold, it's here to show that it has a real presence. Look at those boxed off arches, or the chunky headlights. And let's not forget that big, wide, gaping grille. Now, this particular RAV4 PHEV is in dynamic trim, and it means it gets these nice big 19-inch alloy wheels. I think some of the smaller options on lesser trim levels maybe look a bit empty in the arches, but these look really strong and purposeful, and they've got a really nice two-tone effect to them. Premium, matches the rest of the car. Speaking of two-tone, dynamic cars also get contrasting roof and arch trims. Moving down the big square glass house, you have a thick C-pillar and a nice subtle styling kink that runs down it. The rear of the car is just as imposing, everything very horizontal, spanning the width of the car to exaggerate a sense of scale. Now, all of this design work isn't bespoke to the PHEV, so you'd be thinking, well, Toyota must be playing it subtle, not letting people know that it's a plug-in hybrid, until you see the vast quantity of chrome badging just about everywhere. If there's a flat surface, it tells you it's a PHEV. Like here, or here. Or what about all of this? So yes, it's a RAV4, but don't forget about the plug. It's a very similar story when we look at the interior. It'll be very familiar to anyone who's driven a current generation RAV4 before. Everything's very chunky, everything's very purposeful, everything's very functional. It's not the most glamorously designed SUV, but it certainly is one that feels like it's not going to fall apart anytime soon. There are some soft touch materials around the cabin, and the neat stitching is a welcome addition. If you look around the cabin, you will find some harder plastics, but I don't want to knock the cabin too much for this because I feel Toyota have chosen these materials on purpose to last the car's lifetime. The RAV4 PHEV features an instrument binnacle with a 7-inch digital display. I will come back to that. The centre console features a 9-inch infotainment display, which is a nice big screen. I love the shortcut buttons that run down the side. It makes it really nice and easy to use on the move. However, it is let down by an operating system with the graphical capacity of Windows XP. Positive marks have to go to the physical air conditioning controls and not plonking those all into the touchscreen. And I really like the rubber knurling around the side, which makes them easier to use when wearing gloves. The part leather seats of this dynamic car are plenty supportive and have loads of adjustment. While the rearmost passengers are far from claustrophobic thanks to big windows, loads of headroom, plenty of legroom. However, the middle passenger does have to deal with a modest transmission hump. The whole cabin feels really sturdy and has a sense of solidity to it, and this is one of the reasons people buy a Toyota, because it's going to take the punishment of family life. Open the rather slow electric tailgate on the RAV4 PHEV to find a 520 litre boot, which is plenty big enough. Nice square opening, flat floor, there's underfloor storage here for cables as well. However, it is 60 litres down on the regular car. So what about driving the Toyota RAV4 PHEV? Well, given Toyota's wealth of experience with hybrid vehicles over the decades, it's maybe unsurprising that it's actually pretty good. I mean, a lot of manufacturers have had troubles marrying the electrical and combustion side of a vehicle in a plug-in hybrid. Obviously, they've got to work in harmony, and they're two very different ways of powering a car, so it's pretty tricky. Some manufacturers do it very well, others need to try a bit harder. Peugeot. Toyota, on the other hand, have absolutely nailed this, and the way they've done it is sort of turned the formula on its head. Instead of this being a combustion engine vehicle supplemented by electricity, it's pretty much an EV supplemented by a petrol engine, in this case a 2.5 litre 4-cylinder engine. This combines with 2 electric motors, one on each axle, and an 8.1 kilowatt-hour battery. Said battery can be charged from a household 3-pin plug in 7.5 hours, or from a 7 kilowatt wall box in 2.5 hours. Total pure EV range in this RAV4 is up to 46 miles, which, to be honest, should cover you for your commute to work and back. So if you've got somewhere to plug in at home, you might be a long time before you go back to the petrol station. Now, when I say Toyota have sort of turned things on its head, by that I mean the RAV4 actually runs predominantly on electricity and very, very rarely uses its engine. It will use the engine if the battery charge is particularly low or if the driver requires extra power for performance. But by and large, it's the EV side of things that's doing all of the work. The engine's sort of more serving as a bit of a generator, which is a very efficient means of doing things. Now, you can have that pure EV mode up to 84 miles per hour, but in hybrid mode, the transition between petrol, electricity, and a combination of both is silky smooth. I mean, some manufacturers that have struggled, there's a real noticeable chonky change between the two. You can hear the engine fire, and it's not the most pleasant of experiences. Here, do you know what? I think if you weren't told, you might not notice. The engine is so quiet, and that's only ever interrupted if you really hoof it on the accelerator, and because it's got one of those CVT gearboxes, which is always controversial amongst road testers, they have a habit of really mooing and sounding coarse whenever you're accelerating hard. But actually, when you're cruising, it really matches the overall refined nature of this vehicle. It's a really good drivetrain. It definitely deserves some credit. As I said, it's a really good cruiser. On the motorway, it's refined, it settles down, it has this nice, secure road holding. It just makes you feel like you've got a bit of confidence in what you're sat on top of here. It's got relatively weighty, predictable steering. Again, it just stops it from feeling nervous at speed, and the whole thing just feels planted and confidence inspiring. There's plenty of grip, of course. It's no sports car, it's it's over 2 ton 4x4. And you do feel the added weight of the battery versus its more mild hybrid counterparts. But I have to say, generally speaking, the RAV4 is a really serene thing to be driving around in. There's a little bit of road noise that comes into the cabin, not loads, and wind noise is very well suppressed. Even around town, it behaves itself remarkably well. Of course, as an EV, it's just the perfect partner. Silent running, it's very relaxing, no emissions, obviously. But also it's the little things, like there's really good, for such a big vehicle, the visibility is excellent all the way around. Even without the reversing camera, the rear windscreen's a really good size and the door mirrors are big and just give you a good sense of what's going on around you. Low speed ride is probably one gripe I do have. Around town, if you hit potholes, road imperfections, speed bumps, it does jar a little bit, and that's to do with the suspension calibration because it's got to take the extra weight of the batteries on this model. However, I will say that improves the faster you go. Now, coming back to that gripe I do have from behind the wheel that I mentioned earlier is the instrument binnacle. Now, it's got a great big 7-inch digital display in the middle, which is very customizable for all sorts of information and data that you might want. So you can tailor that to how you see fit. Then there are also a series of dials telling you, as sort of a dancing needle, telling you what the car's doing, whether it's using predominantly combustion or whether it's more of an eco mode or if it's recharging through generative braking. You've also got your fuel gauges and you've got what the battery display is doing, and it's just all a bit busy. I find myself looking down here much more than I should be, just because I can't quickly zero in on what I'm looking for. And I think quite crucially, the most difficult part of this is trying to read what speed you're actually doing. There's no, as far as I can see, digital readout to tell you exactly the figure you're doing. You have to go for sort of a virtual needle running up and down a virtual clock, which is fine, but the needle itself has like a blue halo, a blue aura around it, and it makes it very difficult to find out exactly how fast you're going, which can be a bit nerve-wracking going through average speed camera zones and things like that. And because things like 30 and 70 miles an hour aren't marked on the speedo, again, I find myself looking down here much more than looking out here. Something we haven't really touched on is why people actually go out and buy a Toyota in the first place. And that's largely because of its hard-earned reputation for reliability and durability. You get it from the immediate moment you step into the cabin. Everything feels like it's here to last. It's strong, sturdy, nothing's loose, nothing creaks. Everything, okay, you might have some less plush materials dotted around the car, but you know it's there not for cost-saving reasons, but because engineers decided this was the thing that was going to do the distance. This is the thing that's going to last. And it's same for all of the mechanicals in the car as well. Toyotas aren't the great Japanese bargain they were 30, 40 years ago, okay? But they are very much worth their money as something trustworthy, as a vehicle you can really depend upon and rely upon. Now, in terms of figures for the RAV4, Toyota claims 282.5 mpg and emissions of 22 grams per kilometre of CO2, which is all mighty impressive. But of course, the real world figures totally depend upon how much you run on electricity and how frequently you plug in. However, if you are a company car user, there are definitely some benefit in kind advantages to be had here. Now, occasionally noisy CVT and old school infotainment system aside, I think the RAV4 PHEV is a really commendable effort. If you love owning a RAV4 currently, or are very familiar with Toyota's hybrid systems, then this is an easy transition, another stepping stone towards full electrification. I think the drivetrain is really commendable here. It's a sharp looking thing and it has all of the credentials for family life. However, at £46,495, this RAV4 is not cheap, and it has a sister car which is only rebadged somewhat for Suzuki, the Suzuki Across, and it comes in at slightly less money than the Toyota. However, the Toyota badge is perceived to be more premium than Suzuki's, and it comes with that hybrid pedigree. Head to yesauto.com for the latest car news and reviews, and don't forget to check us out on social media. We're in all the usual places such as Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. Simply search for Yes Auto.